Vida di Lazarillo di Tormes, y sus fortunes, adversited et anonymous, the life of Lazarillo di Tormes, and his fortunes and misfortunes, by an unknown author Burgos edition, 1554. To this end, Pliny says that there is no book, however bad, that does not contain some good thing. Moreover, tastes are not all the same, but what one disdains, another loses out on. And so we see things held in low regard by some, yet valued by others. Interpolations from the Alcohol edition prologue, I believe it is for the good that such notable things, and by fortune never before heard or seen, come to the knowledge of many, and are not buried in the tomb of oblivion. For it may be that whoever reads them finds something pleasing to him, and those who do not delve deeply will still find delight. And this, for nothing at all, should neither be broken nor cast aside, if it were not highly detestable, but rather communicated to all, above all without prejudice, and able to produce some fruit. For if it were otherwise, very few would write for one alone, since it is not done without labour, and they want, since they spend their time, to be rewarded, not with money, but by seeing and reading their works, and if there is something noteworthy, to praise them. Don Fulano behaved very ruinly, and gave the set of weapons to the scoundrel, because he praised him for having carried good lances. What would he have done if it were true? The presented one preaches very well, and he is a man who greatly desires the benefit of souls, but ask his grace if he feels burdened when they say to him, "Oh, how wonderfully your reverence has done this, Mr." And on this account Tullio says, "Honour nurtures the arts," who thinks that the soldier who is first on the scale has a more loathsome life. No, indeed, rather, the desire for praise makes him put himself in danger, and so it is with the arts and letters as well. I beg your M to accept the poor service of whoever made him richer, if his power and desire conformed, and since VM, and everything goes like this, admitting that I am no holier than my neighbours, from this lowly writing style, I will not be troubled if they take part, and every one who finds some taste in it sees that a man lives with so many fortunes, dangers, and adversities. First treaty Lazaro recounts his life, and whose son he was. Therefore know you, your majesty, above all else, that they call me Lazaro of Tormes, son of Tom Gonzalez and Antona Perez, natives of Tejeres, a village in Salamanca. Writes, he should write and relate the case very extensively. It seemed to me not to take it by the middle, but from the beginning, so that there is a full knowledge of my person, and also so that those who inherited noble states consider how little they are owed, since fortune was partial with them, and how much more those who, against her, with strength and skill rowing, achieved good results. My birth took place within the river Tormes, for which reason I adopted the nickname, and it was thus. I hope in God who is in glory, for the gospel calls them blessed. My father, may God forgive him, had the responsibility of providing for a grinding mill at Anacia, located on the banks of that river, where he worked as a miller for over 15 years. One night, while my mother was working at the Acinga, pregnant with me, she went into labour and gave birth to me there, so I can truly say I was born in the river. When I was 8 years old, they accused my father of certain poorly performed bloodlettings on the sacks brought for grinding there, which led to his imprisonment. He confessed and did not deny, and endured persecution for justice. During this time, a certain armada was formed against the Moors, among whom was my father, who at that time had been banished due to the aforementioned disaster, as an armourer for a knight who went there, and with his lord, as a loyal servant, he ended his life. My widowed mother, seeing herself without a husband and without protection, decided to align herself with the good people, becoming one of them, and came to live in the city, renting a small house, and cooking meals for certain students, and washing clothes for some horse boys from the commander of Magdalena, so she frequently visited the stables. So, continuing with the inn and conversation, my mother gave me a very nice little black boy, whom I would jump and help to warm up. She in a dark skinned man who treated the animals became acquainted. He would sometimes visit our home and leave in the morning. Other times, during the day, he would come to the door, pretending to buy eggs, and enter the house. At the beginning of his arrival, I weighed him, and was afraid of him, seeing the colour and bad gesture he had. But as I saw that with his coming, eating improved, I wanted to be friendly with him, because he always brought bread, pieces of meat, and in winter firewood, which we used to warm ourselves, and when nothing else was available, he would take animals from others. He would go to my mother to raise my brother. Let us not be amazed at a clerk or a friar, because one steals from the poor, and the other from his home for his devotions, and to help others as well, when love encourages a poor slave to do this. He was proven wrong in everything I say, and even more, because they would ask me with threats, and as a child I would answer, revealing what I knew out of fear, up to certain horseshoes that I sold to a blacksmith at my mother's command. I'll sadly of my stepfather they whipped and branded. My mother was given punishment for justice, over the usual century, that in the house of the aforementioned commendador should not enter, nor should wounded Zaid in his own. And I remember that while my father's negro was struggling with the young man, as the child saw my mother and me white, and him not, he ran, hid away from him in fear for my mother, pointing his finger and saying, "Mother, monster." He responded, laughing, "Stupid." Although I was quite young, I noticed that word from my little brother, and I thought to myself, how many there must be in the world who run away from others because they do not see themselves. It was our fortune that the conversation of Zaid, who was so called, reached the ears of the butler, and upon investigation it was found that he had been stealing half through the barley that was given to the animals, and salvaging wood, aprons, 8 blankets, and sheets from the horses, making them lost. During this time a blind man came to the inn, and as he thought I could assist him, he asked my mother, who entrusted me to him, saying that I was the son of a good man who had died in defence of his faith against the Guelphs, and that she trusted in God that I would not become a worse man than my father. To avoid throwing the rope after the cauldron, the sad one strained and carried out the sentence, and to avert danger and silence malicious tongues, she went to serve those who at present lived in the inn of La Solana, and there, enduring 1,000 inconveniences, she raised my little brother until he learned to walk, and me until I became a good young man, going to the guests for wine and candles, and whatever else they commanded. As we stayed in Salamanca for some days, my master decided to leave since he deemed the profit inadequate. She begged him to treat me well, and look out for me as I was an orphan. He assured her he would do so, and accepted me not as a servant, but as a son. And thus I began to serve and train my new and old master. Take care of yourself. And so I left for my master, who was waiting for me. When it came time to depart, I went to see my mother, who, both of us weeping, gave me her blessing and said, "Son, I know I will not see you again. Be good, and God will guide you. I have reared you and placed you with a good master." It seemed to me in that moment I woke up from the simplicity in which like a sleeping child I had been. It is unnecessary to tell your majesty these childish things to demonstrate how much virtue it is for men to rise when they are low, and allow themselves to be lowered when they are high, how much vice it is. We left Salamanca, and on reaching the bridge there was a stone statue at its entrance that almost took the form of a bull, and the blind man told me to get close to it, so I stood there, and he said, "Lazarus, listen to this bull's ear, and you will hear a great noise inside." I simply got closer, believing him, and as he felt my head was level with the stone, he firmly held his hand, and hit me hard on the devil of the bull, which caused me 3 days' pain from the horn wound, and said, "Fool, learn that the blind man's boy knows a point more than the devil." He laughed much at the mockery. I thought to myself, he speaks truly, for it is time I opened my eyes and took notice, as I am alone, and to think how I can make use of myself. We began our journey, and in very few days he showed me his tricks, and since he saw that I had a good mind, he relaxed a lot and said, "He cannot give you gold or silver, but I will show you advice for living many years." And so it was that after God gave him life, he enlightened me though I was blind, and taught me the way of living. Returning to my story about my blind friend, your Majesty should know that since God created the world, no one has been more cunning or shrewd. Apart from that, he had thousands of other ways to make money. In his work he was an eagle. He knew over 100 hymns by heart with a low, calm, and very pleasant tone that resonated in the church where he prayed, a humble and devoted face that he wore when praying, without making gestures or expressions with his mouth or eyes, as others usually do. In the case of medicine, he claimed to know more than Galen, especially for toothaches, faints, and maternal ailments. He said he knew prayers for many and diverse effects, for women who did not give birth, for those in labor, for those who were unhappy in their marriages, so that their husbands would love them. He made predictions for pregnant women, whether they would have a son or a daughter. He derived great benefits from these practices, and earned more in a month than 100 blind men in a year. However, I also want your grace to know that despite all he acquired, I never met a greedier or more stingy man. He starved me to death, and thus he did not spare me what was necessary. Finally, no one told him they suffered from any passion, as he would then prescribe. Do this, and you will do that, sue such an herb, take such a root. With these words, everyone followed him, especially women, who believed everything he said. I say the truth, if with my cunning and good deeds I couldn't find a way out, many times I would starve, but with all his knowledge and warnings, in such a way that almost always, or most of the time, I got the best part. To this end, I made devilish jokes at him, of which I will tell some, though not all, to my credit. He carried bread and all other things in a canvas bag that was sealed with an iron ring and a lock and key, and when he put everything inside and took it out again, he did so with such great care and attention that no man on earth could have left him even a crumb. But I took that old bag he gave me, which I devoured in less than 2 bites. Everything I could snatch and steal, I brought in white socks, and when they told him to pray and gave him white socks, as he lacked sight, there was no one who gave it to pretending with them. When I had it launched in my mouth, and the sock ready, that even before he reached for his hand, it was already taken from me at half its just price. After I locked the padlock, and let my guard down thinking that I was preoccupied with other things, through a little sewing, which often undid one side of the bag, and I would sew it back up again, the poor bag blid, taking out not just a loaf of bread, but good pieces, bacon rinds, and sausage, and thus I sought convenient time to repair, not the cruddy thing, but the devilish lack that the blind evil lacked. I would complain to him about the blind evil, because after touching me, he knew and felt that I was not entirely white, and he would say, "What in the world is this? After being with me, they only give me half white ones, and before they paid me a whole white and a lot of coins." Then he would start shouting again, asking if they were sending him to pray a certain prayer, just like they usually do. This misfortune must be in you. He also shortened his prayers, and didn't finish half of the prayer, because he had told me that when whoever sent him to pray left, he should grab him by the cap's cord. I did as he instructed. He used to put a small wine jar on the table when we ate, and I quickly kissed it, and gave him a couple of silent kisses before returning it to its place. I drank little, as I knew the lack in drinks, and by reserving my wine, I never again abandoned the jar before holding it by the handle, but there was no magnet stone that attracted me like I did with a long straw of rye bread, which I had made for that purpose. Inserting it into the jar's mouth, I sucked the wine, leaving it safe for the night. But as the traitor was so cunning, I think he sensed it, and from then on changed his mind, placing his jar between his legs and covering it with his hand, drinking safely like that. When the poor man went to drink, he found nothing. He became frightened, cursed, gave the jar and wine to the devil, not knowing what it could be. As I was made of wine, I died for it, and seeing that the remedy of straw did not profit me nor avail, I agreed on the ground of the jar to make him a small spring and subtle hole, and delicately with a very thin wax tortilla covered it. And at the time of eating, pretending to have cold, I would slip between the legs of the poor blind one to warm myself in the poor little fire that we had, and at the heat thereof later melted the wax, because it was very little. The spring began to distill into my mouth, which I put in such a way that the cursed drop disappeared. It truly seemed to me that heaven, with all its contents, had fallen upon me. You won't say, Uncle, that I drink it, he said, because you don't take it from his hand. After many twists and turns, the jar found its source and fell into scorn. But he hid it as if he hadn't felt it, and another day, while I was pouring my jar as usual, not thinking of the impending harm or the blind evil that had ensnared me, I sat down as I normally would, receiving those sweet sips with my face towards the sky, my eyes slightly closed to better savour the delicious liquor. The desperate blind man realized that he now had time to take revenge on me, and with all his might, lifting the sweet and bitter jar with both hands, he dropped it onto my mouth, aided by all his strength, so that poor Lazarus, who was unaware of any of this, as he had been in previous instances, was careless and joyful. It was such a sharp blow that it disoriented me and took me out of sense, and the impact was so great that the pieces hit my face, breaking it in many places, and shattered my teeth, without which I remained until today. From that hour I hated the blind evil, and although I loved and gave gifts to him, I could see that he had escaped from the cruel punishment. He washed me with wine the breaks that the pieces of the jar had caused me, and smiling, he said, "What do you think, Lazarus? What sickened you heals and gives health, and other favours that were not to my liking." And although I wanted to calm my heart and forgive him the shock, the mistreatment he gave me, guided by his blind evil, left no room for it. He hurt me without cause or reason, giving me slaps and pushing me away. Since I recovered from my black bruise and cardinals, considering that a few more blows would spare me from such a cruel blind man, I wanted to save myself from him. But I didn't do it quickly, because I wanted to do it for my safety and advantage. And if anyone asked him why he was treating me so badly, he told the story of the jar. Will you think that my servant is an innocent? Then listen if the devil tries another such feat. Those who heard him cursed, saying, "Look at what such a small boy can do." And they laughed loudly at his cunning, saying, "Punished, punished, for God will hold you accountable." And this was all he ever did. And I always led him down the worst paths, intentionally, to cause him pain and harm. If there were stones, I went over them. If it was mud, I walked on top of it, even though I didn't take the easiest route. I saved myself from getting a black eye by giving two to someone who had none. With this, always keeping the rope taut with caution, I watched out for the snake, which was always filled with toads and bare of its hands, and although I swore I did not do it maliciously, but rather because I could not find a better path. He would not believe me or take advantage of me, such was the insight and immense understanding of the traitor. And so that your majesty may see how far reaching the wit of this cunning blind man was, I will tell you a story of many events that happened to me with him, in which it seems he fully demonstrated his great cunning. When we left Salamanca, he said he wanted to come to the land of Toledo, because he claimed the people there were the richest, although not very charitable. He would quote this proverb, "The hard one gives more than the naked one," and we took this route through the best places. Wherever I found good hospitality and profit, we stopped. Wherever not, after 3 days we moved on to St. John's. He decided to have a feast, not only to help him carry it, but also to console me after all the kicks and blows I had received that day. It happened that upon reaching a place called Almarox, while they were picking grapes, a grape-picker gave him a cluster as alms, and since the baskets are usually badly treated, and because the grapes at that time were very ripe, the cluster came apart in his hand. It turned into must when he tried to put it in his sack. We sat on a wall, and he said, "Now I want to use my generosity with you, and that is for both of us to eat this cluster of grapes, sharing it equally." As I saw him breaking form, I didn't content myself with keeping up with him, but even went ahead 2 to 2 and 3 to 3 as fast as I could. "Here's how we'll do it. You will take one bite, and I will take another. But if you promise not to take more than a grape at each turn, I will do the same until we finish, ensuring there's no trickery." After the concert began, we started. But then, on the second round, the traitor changed his mind and started taking 2 at a time, thinking I should do the same. You were eating 2 at a time while I was eating mine, and you remained silent. To which I did not respond. Once the cluster was finished, he stood for a moment with the twig in his hand and shook his head, saying, "Lazarus, you've deceived me. I'll swear to God that you ate the grapes 3 at a time." "I didn't eat them," I said. "But why do you suspect that?" The shrewd blind man replied, "Do you know what makes me think you ate them 3 at a time?" And as I was trying to see if it was the inn, where he prayed every day for the innkeeper's blessing, he grabbed a horn and with a deep sigh said, "What a bad fate! Worse than your appearance." While we were walking under some supports in Escalona, where we happened to be staying at the house of a shoemaker, there were many ropes and other things made of hemp, and part of them struck my master on the head. "How many desire to put your name on someone else's head, and how few even get to hear your name, let alone see you?" As I heard him speak, I asked, "Uncle, what are you saying?" He replied, "Be quiet. Nephew, one day this will give you a bad meal and dinner." He raised his hand and touched them, and seeing what they were, he said to me, "Hurry up, little one. Let's get out of this bad fare that chokes without eating." I, who was quite careless about it, looked at what it was, and as I only saw ropes and straps, which weren't something to eat, I told Himkel, "Why do you say that?" He answered me, "Be silent. Nephew, according to your tricks, you will know and see how true I am." And so we went forward through the same gate and arrived at an inn, where on the wall there were many horns where they tied their animals' memories. It was all I ever prayed for: waiters, tavern, keepers, pastry-makers, prostitutes, and other similar little girls, for whom I rarely saw a man pray. I laughed to myself, noticing the subtle consideration of the blind man all the more. "I won't eat it, nor will I accept it." "I tell you the truth," he said. "If not, you'll see if you live long enough." And so we continued until we reached the inn's door, where, according to what happened to me there, God never wanted us to arrive. But for not being neat, I leave out many things, as amusing as noting that with this, my first master, certain things happened to me, and I want to say goodbye and end it here. We were in Escalona, a village of Duke Della, in an inn, and he gave me a piece of longanizer that I roasted. Since the longanizer had become greasy, and the grease had been eaten, he took out a maravdi from his bag and ordered me to go get wine at the tavern. The devil put the equipment before my eyes, which, as they say, makes a thief, and it turned out there was a small, thin, ruined turnip, one that wouldn't fit in the pot, so it had to be thrown away. And as at present there was nobody but him and me, I felt such a sudden hunger that the delicious smell of the sausage filled my nostrils, which I knew only too well I had to enjoy, without considering what might happen to me, putting all fear aside in order to satisfy my desire. As the blind man took out his money from the bag, I took out the sausage and quickly put the aforementioned turnip on the fire. My master, having given me the money for wine, took it and began turning it over the fire, wanting to roast him who, because of his faults, had escaped being cooked. I ran for the wine, with which I did not delay in consuming the sausage, and when I returned, I found the sinner who was holding the turnip tightly between two slices, which I had never tasted before, because I hadn't tried it with my hand. If you want to play tricks on me, why don't you bring the wine? As he took the slices and bit into them, thinking to also take a part of the sausage, he was shocked by the cold turnip. He became angry and exclaimed, "What is this, Lazarillo?" "Torn apart by me," I answered. Someone was there, and out of mockery he would do this. "No, no," he said. "I haven't let go of the grill. It's impossible." I swore again and again that I was free from that bargain and exchange, but it did me little good, for the tricks of the damned blind man hid nothing from him. At that moment, with his anger, it had grown another palm, reaching my throat. And with this, and the great fear I had, and the brevity of time, the black, chewy sausage still hadn't settled in my stomach, and most importantly, with the overwhelming scent of the nose, I was almost suffocating. He stood up, grabbed my head, and came close to smell me, and sensing the stink, like a good hound, he satisfied himself with the truth, using his great agony, and grasping my hands, he opened my mouth wider than right, and carelessly stuck his nose in, which was long and sharp. All these things combined, and became cause for the incident, and delicacy to manifest, and for it to be returned to its owner, so that before the blind evil could extract its snout from my mouth. Such a disturbance occurred in my stomach that it reacted with the theft, causing both the nose and the black, badly chewed sausage to exit my mouth at once. Oh, great God, if I were buried during that moment, I was already dead. The audacity of the wicked blind man was such that, without responding to the noise, I believe he would not have let me live. The blind evil told everyone who approached about my misfortunes, recounting them over and over, both the one with the jar and the one with the bunch. And now the present one. They pulled me from his hands, leaving him with full hands of the few hairs I had, my face scratched, and my neck and throat raked, and this was well deserved, for through his evil I faced so many persecutions. Everyone's laughter was so loud that people passing by on the street would come in to see the party, but with such grace and wit, the blind man retold my exploits that, even though I was so mistreated and crying, it seemed unjust not to laugh at them. Just by clenching my teeth, I could have stayed home, and despite his wickedness, my stomach was better equipped than the sausage to hold on, and they couldn't deny the demand. May God wish that I had done it, for it to be as it is now. And as this happened, a feeling of cowardice and weakness came to mind, for I cursed myself, deciding not to leave him without a nose, since I had ample time to do so. Half the journey had already been completed. We made friends with the innkeeper and those present there, and with the wine he had brought for drinking, they washed my face and throat, upon which I started to remove the blind man's bad humour with jests, saying, "For truth's sake, this boy spends more on washing in a year than I do on drinking in 2. I tell you," he said, "if there is anyone in the world who will be blessed with wine, it will be you." Those who were washing me laughed much at this, although I protested. "At least, Lazarus, you are more concerned about wine than your father, because he once gave you birth, but wine has given you life 1,000 times over." And then he told how many times I had tripped and scraped my face, which wine subsequently healed. But the blind man's prophecy did not turn out to be false, and afterwards many times I remembered that man, who surely must have had a prophetic spirit, and I feel sorry for the hardships I caused him, even though I paid him back well. Considering what he said to me that day, as true as V, M will hear from now on. Given this, and the cruel mocks the blind man cast upon me, I resolved to let it all go, and as I had already decided, and was willing, this final act only affirmed my resolve. Let's get to the inn before it gets any worse. To get there, we had to cross a stream that was wide due to all the water. So, another day we went around town begging, and it had rained heavily the night before. and since it was raining that day too. We sought shelter under some arcades in that village, where we remained dry. But as evening approached, and the rain showed no signs of letting up, the blind man said to me, "Lazarus, this water is obstinate, and as night falls, it grows stronger." I told him, "Uncle, the stream is very wide, but if you wish, I can find a better way to cross it without getting wet, because it narrows down over there, and we can jump across easily." He found my suggestion prudent, and said, "You are wise. That's why I like you. Take me to that place where the stream turns bloody. It's winter now, and the water tastes bad, especially with wet feet. Jump as much as you can, because we're leaving this end of the water." Just as he finished speaking, the poor blind man leapt forward like a devil, using all his strength, took a step back from the rush to make a bigger jump, and hit his head on the post, which sounded so hard as if he had hit a large pumpkin, and then fell backward half dead with a split head. I, who saw the gear at my whim, took it beneath the arcades, and carried it straight from a stone pillar that stood in the square, on which they loaded salting pipes from those houses, and said, "Uncle, this is the narrowest passage in the stream. Since it was raining hard, the sad one got wet, and with the urgency we had to get out of the water falling on us. And most importantly, because God blinded his understanding, that hour it was for my vengeance, he believed me and said, 'Stand up straight and jump across the stream.' I placed him straight in front of the pillar, and I jumped and got behind the post, as if waiting for a bull's stop, and told him, 'Go ahead. How come you smelled the sausage and not the post?' 'Bravo, bravo,' I said, and I left him in the care of many people who had come to help, took the village gate a trot, and before nightfall I found myself in Torrijos. I didn't find out what God did to him, nor did I bother to know. I escaped from thunder and hit lightning, because he was like Alexander the Great to me in terms of avarice, as I have said. I won't elaborate, but all the filth of the world was contained within him. I don't know if it was from his own harvest, or if he had annexed it with the habit of priesthood. Second treaty how Lazarus settled with a clerk, and the events that happened with him another day. Not feeling safe there, I went to a place called Maqueda, where my sins led me to a clerk who, upon asking for alms, asked if I knew how to assist at Mass. I said yes, for it was true, that, though mistreated, the sinner showed me many good things, one of which was this finally: the priest accepted me as his own. He had an old, locked chest with a key that he carried tied to a peg on his belt, and as the church porter approached, he would throw the key inside and close the chest. There was only one hook for onions, and the key to a chamber at the top of the house. And in the entire house there wasn't a single thing to eat. Unlike other homes, some bacon hanging from a hook, some cheese on a table or in a cupboard, a basket with some leftover bread from the table. It would have comforted me just to look at it, even if I couldn't benefit from it. In the end I would starve. Since he had little compassion for me, I used to take advantage of him more. His usual meal was 5 white pieces of meat for lunch and dinner. It's true that he would share some soup with me, but the meat— oh! From these I had as my ration one every 4 days, and when I asked for the key to go and get them, if anyone was present, he would grab the false pretense, and with great restraint untee it and give it to me, saying, "Take it, and bring it back later, and don't eat but indulge yourselves," as if underneath it were all of Valentia's preserves, when in fact there wasn't a single thing in that chamber besides the cursed onions hanging from a nail, which he kept so well accounted for that. If, through my sins, he went beyond my ration, it would cost me dearly. How white it was! And a little bread, and may God forbid that he ever divided it in half. On Saturdays we would eat lamb heads here, and they would send me to get one that cost 3 maravedis. You have a better life than the Pope. May God give you such, I would think to myself. After 3 weeks with him, I was so weak that I could not stand on my legs from pure hunger. She would cook it, eating the eyes and tongue and cheeks and brains and all the meat in the jaws, giving me all the bones chewed up in a plate, saying, "Take, eat, triumph, for this is your world." I clearly saw myself going to the grave if God and my knowledge did not help me. He counted every white that was offered, and after finishing the offering, he would remove the shell and place it on the altar. I was not the master of taking a white from him for all the time that I lived with him, or rather died. I had no means to use my skills, because I had nothing to jump onto. Even if I had something, I couldn't blindfold it, as he did who God forgave, for that round head ended there, and although clever, I still didn't have that precious sense, nor is there anyone with such sharp sight as he had. When we were at the offertory, not a single white in the shell fell that was not recorded by him. He had one eye on the people and another on my hands. His eyes danced in his head as if they were made of mercury. Why? Because I said of the dead, God forgive me that I was never an enemy of human nature, but then, and this was because we ate well, and it satisfied me. I desired and even begged God every day to take his own life. And when any of them escaped, God forgive me, 1,000 times I gave him to the devil, and whoever died took many blessings from me. From the tavern I never brought him a white wine, but that little bit that I had hidden in his pouch, it comforted him so much that it disturbed him for an entire week, and to hide his great meanness, he would tell me, "Look, young man, priests have to be very temperate in their eating and drinking, and that's why I don't indulge like others." But the torn one lied falsely, because in the confraternities and funerals that we prayed, at someone else's expense, he would eat like a wolf and drink more than a saluter. And when we gave the sacrament to the sick, especially the extreme unction, as the priest commands us to pray for those present, I certainly was not the last in prayer, and with all my heart and good will I beg the Lord, not that he would cast it to the part that would serve most, as is usually said, but that he would take him from this world. So I found no rest in anything except death, which I also desired for myself and others at times, but I did not see it, although it was always within me. But from the present suffering I found no remedy, as if on the day we buried me, the days when I had not yet died, because of the overwhelming hunger, returning to my daily starvation, I felt it even more acutely. Because during all the time I was there, which would be nearly 6 months, only 20 people died, and I believe that I either killed them or, better said, they died at my expense, foreseeing the Lord my furious and continuous death. I thought it would have been more merciful to kill them by giving me my life. I thought many times about leaving that stingy master, but for 2 reasons I stayed. The first was that I was too afraid to stand up to him, fearing my legs would give out from pure hunger, and the second was that I considered and said, I have had 2 masters. The first left me dead from hunger, and after leaving him I found myself in even worse circumstances. He asked if I needed anything to eat. If I abandon this one and turn to another lower down, what will become of me but to perish? With this in mind, I dared not move, as I believed that all degrees would be even more wretched, and if I descended further, neither Lazarus nor anyone else would be heard in the world. So, while in such distress, as a faithful Christian might pray for deliverance from the Lord, and without knowing how to give advice, seeing me worsen day by day, one day when my master's cruel and shattered mind had left the place, a cauldron maker, whom I believe was an angel sent to me by God in human form, came to my door. You had plenty to do, and you wouldn't do too little if you remedied it, I said quietly. But he didn't hear me, nevertheless, since there was no time to say thank you, illuminated by the Holy Spirit. I told him, Uncle, I've lost a key from this ark, and I fear my Lord will punish me. For your life, see if any of those you bring have one that fits, for I'll repay you. He began testing the angelic cauldron, one after another, from a great pile he brought with him, and I helped him with my feeble prayers. When he didn't notice me, I saw, in the form of breads, as they say, God's face within the ark. And when it was open, I said, I don't have money to give you for the key, but take payment from there. He took a fig from those, the one that seemed best to him, and giving me my key, he left very pleased, leaving me behind. But I didn't touch anything at hand, because it wouldn't have been felt as a lack, and even so, because I saw so much good from my Lord, it seemed that hunger dared not approach me. Wine the wretched one of my Lord, and God had not looked at the field where the angel had gathered it. And so I remained with it that day, and another joyful one. Another day, as I left the house, I opened my beehive paradise, and between my hands and teeth I took a fig, and in 2 breaths made it invisible, not forgetting the open ark, and I began to sweep the house with great joy, seeming to remedy with that remedy my sad life from then on. But I was not in my happiness that it would last long, because on the 3rd day the tertian came, and it was that at an unusual time I saw him, who was killing me of hunger over our ark turning and turning, counting and returning to count the breads. It seemed to pass through my heart like an arrow from a hunter's bow, and my stomach began to gnaw with hunger, seeing it had been on the previous diet. I disguised myself, and in my secret prayer and devotions and pleas I said, St. John and blind him. After counting for a long time, day after day and finger by finger, he said, If it weren't for my careful watch over this chest, I would say they had taken the bread from me, but now, just to close the door on suspicion, I want to keep a good account with 9 remain and a piece. May God give you evil, I muttered to myself. He left the house. I, to console myself, opened the chest, and, seeing the bread, began to worship it, not daring to touch it. I counted them, if the wounded one strayed from its count, and found their account more accurate than I wanted. The best I could do was to give them 1,000 kisses, and, most delicately, I cut off a little of the lock he had. With that I passed that day, not as joyful as the previous one. But as hunger grew, I realized that my stomach needed more bread for those 2 or 3 days ahead, and I was in a wretched state, so much so that the only thing I did, when alone, was to open and close the crate and gaze at God's face, as children say. Removing it whole is not convenient, as the missing piece would be evident to anyone who provides me with so much sustenance. But the same God who helps the distressed, seeing me in such dire straits, suggested a small remedy to my mind. Reflecting within myself, I said, This ark is old, large, and broken in some parts, with small holes. One could think that mice, entering it, are damaging this bread. This can be endured. And I began to break the bread into smaller pieces, using some inexpensive tablecloths that were there. I took one and left another, so that on each of 3 or 4 I broke a little bit. Then, as if taking a graham cracker, I ate it, and I was somewhat comforted. But he, when he came to open the ark, saw the mischief, and without doubt believed that mice had caused the damage, for it was very unlike the way they usually act. He examined the whole ark from one end to other, and found certain holes where he suspected they had entered. He called me, saying, Lazarus, look what trouble has come this night for our bread. I was greatly astonished, and asked him what it was. Then another startled me, when I saw him industriously removing nails from the walls and searching for planks with which to nail and close all the holes in the old chest. What it is, he said. Our mice, which leave nothing alive. We began to eat, and God willed that even in this I did well, as I had more bread than the piece I usually received, for he scraped with a knife everything that he thought had been gnawed by mice, saying, Eat this, for a mouse makes clean work. And so on that day, adding the portion from my work, or rather my nails, we finished eating, even though I never started. Oh, my Lord! I exclaimed then, how much misery and fortune and disaster we mortals are subject to, and how quickly the pleasures of this hard life pass. I opened with my useless key, without hope of gaining anything, and saw the 2 or 3 loaves that my master thought were chewed by rats. from which I still extracted some scraps, touching them very lightly, as if using a skilled plier. I went to the sad chest, where I had looked and found it lacking in strength and spirit, soft and rotten from age, and with all my might I struck it with the knife, using it as a shovel. Here I was thinking that with this poor and sad remedy I could ease and bear my miseries, and I was already feeling quite cheerful and fortunate. But my misfortune awoke this battered one from my master's side, and gave him more diligence than he had ever shown himself, for wretched people usually lack that, and now, by closing the holes in the chest, he closed the door to my comfort and opened it to my labours. Thus I lamented, while my diligent carpenter, with many nails and planks, finished his work, saying now, "Treacherous lords, let us change our purpose, for in this bad house you thrive." Having left his home, I went to see the work, and found that he had not left a single hole in the old and sad ark, even where a mosquito could enter. As necessity is such a great teacher, seeing her constantly day and night, I was thinking about how to sustain life, and I think, in order to find these black remedies, that hunger was my light. For they say that wit is alerted by it, and the opposite by satiation, and so it certainly was with me. Well, one night, wide awake, I pondered how I could make use of the old chest, and feeling that my master was asleep, because he snored and let out big gasps, when resting, I quietly got up, having thought during the day what I would do, and left an old knife nearby for just such a situation. And because this very ancient chest was so weak after many years, it quickly gave way, and on its side it agreed to make a good hole for my remedy. Having done that, I forcefully opened the wounded chest, and, feeling around, from the broken bread I made what is written here. Another day came, my master having seen the damage both from the bread and from the hole I had made, and he began to give the mice to the devils, and say, "What shall we say to this?" And with that, somewhat consoled, turning to close, I returned to my straw, in which I rested and slept a little, which I did wrong, and threw it away by not eating, and so it was. For at that time the King of France's cares should not have deprived me of sleep. Never have we felt rats in this house but now. And without doubt he spoke the truth, for if there was to be a truly privileged house in their kingdom, that one ought to be it, because they do not usually dwell where there is nothing to eat. He went back to search for nails throughout the house, and on the walls and boards to block them up. When night came and his rest, then I would be put on my feet with my gear, and whatever he sealed during the day, I would unseal at night. In such a way it happened, and with such haste that without doubt one could say, where one door closes, another opens. Finally, we seemed to have an endless supply of Penelope's web, for whatever he wove by day, I unravelled by night. In just a few days and nights, we had put the poor pantry in such a state that anyone who wanted to speak properly about it would call it nothing more than old armour from another time, given the nails and pegs that were nailed into it. Seeing that his remedy did him no good, he said, "This shield is so abused, and made of so old and brittle wood, that there will be no mouse to defend itself. It's already in such bad shape that if we keep using it, it will leave us without protection. Even worse, although it still works a little, it will soon break down, and I'll have to spend 3 or 4 reals on it." When I found the bread and cheese eaten, and the rat that ate it hadn't fallen, I blamed the devil, asking my neighbours what could be eating the cheese, and taking it out of the trap without falling or staying inside, and with the cat's trap open. The neighbours agreed that it wasn't the rat causing this damage, because it wouldn't have been any less likely for a snake to fall sometimes. A neighbour said, "In your house I remember that a serpent used to roam, and this must be it without doubt. The best remedy I can find, since the one up until now is useless, is to make do with these cursed rats from inside." He then borrowed a trap, and with cheese rinds that I asked my neighbours for. The cat was armed inside the box, which was a great help to me, for, although I didn't need much sauce to eat, I still enjoyed the cheese rinds from the trap, and without them I couldn't bear the rat's noise. And he is right that, since it is long, it has room to take the bait, even if it gets caught on the trap above. As long as it doesn't fit entirely inside, it can still escape. He squared everyone with what he said, and it greatly disturbed my master. From then on, he didn't sleep soundly any more, thinking any woodworm heard at night was the snake biting his ark. Then they would wake him up, and with a stick to the head, since that was told to him, he would hit the ark sinner with great strokes, thinking to scare away the snake. The neighbours were awakened by the noise he made, and I couldn't sleep either. Most times I pretended to be sleeping, and in the morning he would say, "This night, boy, didn't you feel anything?" He went to my straw and disturbed it, and me with it, thinking that the snake would go for me and wrap itself in my straw or my shirt. They said at night these animals seek warmth and go to beds where there are creatures, even puppies, and put them in danger. Because after the snake I walked, and I still think it might come for you to bed, as they are very cold and seek warmth, doth. Praise to God that he doesn't bite me, I said, for I am very afraid of him. This is how I was so exhausted and sleep-deprived that the snake, or more accurately, the night snake, dared not bite me at night nor climb on to my ark, but during the day, while I was in church or about, it would make its jumps. Seeing these damages, and the little remedy I could offer, it walked around at night, as I said, twisted up. I feared that with all those efforts I might not find the key hidden under the straw, and it seemed most secure to put it in my mouth at night, because already, since living with the blind man, I had it so well concealed that I ended up having 12 or 15 maravedis, all in white threads, which didn't get in the way of eating, because otherwise I wasn't the owner of a single thread that the cursed blind man wouldn't fall upon, leaving no seam or repair that he often didn't seek. Well, as I say, each night I would put the key in my mouth and sleep without fear that my master's wizard would fall with it. But when misfortune must come, it is no use being diligent. My fate, or rather my sins, willed that one night, while I was sleeping, the key got stuck in my mouth, which had to be kept open in a certain way and position, so that the air and breath I exhaled while sleeping went out through the gap of the key, which was hollow like a pipe, and whistled. According to my misfortune, it sounded very harsh, so much so that my master's startle heard it, and believed without doubt that it was the hiss of a snake, and indeed it must have seemed so. He got up quickly with his stick in hand, and cautiously approaching the sound of the snake, he came towards me very quietly, not wanting to feel or sense the snake. And when he saw how close he was, he thought that there, in the straw where I was lying, it had come to warm itself by my heat. Raising the stick high, thinking to have it beneath me, and deliver such a powerful blow that it would kill her, I received such a tremendous impact on my head that I lost all sense, and was badly disoriented, as he felt I had hit him, according to what I should do with the fierce strike. He said he reached me and shouted at me, trying to remind me. Upon arriving with it, he found me complaining, still holding my key in my mouth, never having let go of it, half out, just as I was whistling with it. But as he touched my hands, he tried to stop the excessive bleeding, realizing the harm he had caused, and quickly went to find light. The snake killer, startled, wondered what that key could be, looked at it, pulling it completely from my mouth, and saw what it was, because nothing distinguished it from his own guards. He then tried the key, testing the curse with it. The cruel hunter must have said, "I have found the mouse and snake that waged war against me and devoured my property." Of what happened in those 3 following days I will give no credence, for I had them in the belly of the whale. But after returning to myself, I heard my master tell in detail to everyone who came to him about this event. At that moment an old woman entered with a staff in her hand, along with some neighbours, and they began to remove the rags from my head and treat the bruise on my forehead. After 3 days I regained consciousness and found myself lying in my straw, with my head all bandaged and full of oils and ointments, and terrified. I said, "What is this?" The cruel priest answered me, "By faith, the mice and snakes that were destroying me, I have hunted them down." And looking at myself, I saw how badly treated I was, which made me immediately suspect my plight. Since they found me conscious, they relaxed greatly and said, "Now he has come to himself, surely it will be nothing, pleasing to God." They returned once more to tell and laugh at my misfortunes, and I, the sinner, wept them. Despite this, they gave me food, as I was starving, and barely alleviated my hunger. Thus, day by day, within 15 days, I recovered and was out of danger, but not without hunger, and in a weakened state. Find yourself a master, and go with God, for I do not want such diligent a servant in my company. On another day, when I stood up, my master took my hand and led me out the door, setting me free on the street, and said, "Lazarus, from today you are yours, not mine. It is impossible that you were not a boy to a blind man." And crossing himself over me as if I was possessed, he went back into the house and closed his door. And where will that master be found? I thought to myself, if God does not create him again, as he did the world, wandering from door to door, with little hope, for charity has ascended to heaven, God led me to an askeer walking down the street, well dressed and well groomed, his step and bearing in order. He looked at me, and I at him, and he said, "Young man, are you seeking a master?" I answered, "Yes, sir." He replied, "Then follow me, for God has granted you this meeting. You prayed a good prayer today." Third treaty, how Lazarus settled with a squire, and what befall him thereof in this manner, I was compelled to draw strength from weakness, and little by little, with the help of good people, I found myself in this noble city of Toledo, where, by God's grace, in 15 days my wound healed, and while I was sick they would always give me some alms, but after I had recovered they all said to me, "You, scoundrel and swaggerer, seek a master to serve." And I followed, giving thanks to God for what I heard, and also it seemed to me, according to his habit and behavior, to be the one I needed. It was morning when this, my third master, met me, and he took me with him through a large part of the city. We passed by the squares where bread and other supplies were sold. I thought, and even desired, that there he wanted to load me with what was being sold, because this was the proper time when one usually provides for their needs. But he walked quickly past these things. "Perhaps he will not find it here to his satisfaction," I said to myself, "and he will want us to buy it elsewhere." This is how we walked until 11 o'clock. I was the happiest person in the world to see that we hadn't bothered to look for food. I well considered that it should be my new master who provided for us, as he had a supply ready, and the food would be just as I desired it, and even more so. Then he entered the main church, and I followed him, and I saw him very devotedly attend Mass and the other divine services until everything was finished and the people had left. Then we left the church. At a good pace, we started to walk down a street. At this time the clock struck 1 afternoon, and we arrived at a house in front of which my master stopped. And I with him, unfastening the cape's cord on his left side, he took out a key from his sleeve and opened the door, after which we entered the house. The entrance was dark and gloomy, as if it instilled fear in those who entered, though inside there was a small courtyard and reasonable rooms. Once we were inside, taking off his cape, he asked if our hands were clean, and we shook them out and folded them, then neatly blowing on a cushion that was there, he sat down on it. Having done this, he sat down, asking me in great detail where I was from and how I had come to that city, and I gave him a much longer account than he wanted, because I thought it more convenient to have the table set and the pot washed. Nevertheless, I satisfied him about my person as best I could by telling him about my possessions, and keeping silent about the rest, as I thought it unwise to talk in front of him. After that he remained quiet for a while, and I then noticed a bad sign, as it was already almost 2 o'clock, and he showed no signs of eating any more than a dead man. All I had seen were walls, with no sight of a chair, table, bench, or even an ark like one described. In short, it seemed like a haunted house. Following this, I considered how odd it was that the door was locked with a key, and there were no sounds of anyone walking up or down in the house. In this state, he said to me, "You young man, have you eaten?" "No, sir," I said. "It was not yet 8 o'clock when I met you." "Well, although I had already eaten breakfast, and if I felt hungry at any time, let me know that I remain like this until nightfall. That's why, come as you please, as we will have dinner later." When you heard me say this, you might think I was on the verge of losing my composure, not so much from hunger as from seeing my fortune turn against me completely. My hardships returned to mind, and I began to cry over my troubles. Suddenly, the consideration that had led me to think about leaving the priesthood came back to me, saying that even if that path was unfortunate and poor, perhaps I would find something worse. In short, there I wept over my past laborious life and my impending death. I thought to myself, cursed be so much medicine and kindness as my masters find in hunger. He tied me to a post, and took out some pieces of bread from the loaf that had been given to me by God. Seeing this, he said to me, "Come here, young man. What are you eating?" I went to him and showed him the bread. He took a piece, the best and biggest one of 3, and said, "By my life, this good bread seems delicious." "And how so?" I asked. And yet, doing my best to conceal it, "Sire, I am a young man who does not tire easily from eating, blessed God. I can praise myself among all my equals for having the best voice, and that is how I have been praised by my masters until this day. Virtue is that," he said, "and that is why I love you more, because gluttony is for pigs and regular eating is for good men." I understood you well. "Is it good now, sir?" "Yes, indeed," he replied. "Where did you get it?" "Is it made by clean hands?" "I don't know that," I answered. "But its taste does not disgust me." "Thus he pleads with God," said the poor man, and taking it to his mouth, he began to give such fierce bites as I did to the other. "This is most delicious bread," he said, "by God." And as I felt what foot he was using, tell me in a hurry, for I saw him in a position that if he finished before me, he would help me with whatever was left, and with this we ended almost equally. And my master began to shake some few crumbs, which were very small, that had stuck to his chest, and entered into a small room there, and took out a jug that was uncorked and not very new, and after drinking, he invited me to share it with him. I, to maintain the semblance of propriety, said, "Sir, I do not drink wine." "It is water," he replied. "You can certainly drink." Then I took the jug and drank not much, because thirst was not my affliction. Thus we stayed until nightfall, talking about things he asked me, to which I answered as best I could. At this time he led me to the chamber where the jar we drank from was kept, and said to me, "Waiter, stand there and watch as we make this bed, so you can learn how to do it from now on." He grabbed one end, I grabbed the other, and we made the bed. There wasn't much work involved, because she had a mat over some benches, upon which the clothes were spread out. Because they hadn't been washed in a while, they didn't look like a mattress, although they served as such, with quite less wool than was needed. We spread that one, aiming to soften it. But it was impossible. What's hard cannot be made soft. The devil in the cursed bed had something within itself when placed on the mat. All the straws stood out and looked like a very thin pig's nest. And upon that hungry mattress lay a blanket of the same kind, whose colour I couldn't discern. Once the bed was made and night had fallen, he said to me, "Lazarus, it's late, and there's a long way to the square from here. Also in this city there are many thieves who sneak around at night. Let's pass by carefully, and tomorrow, when the day comes, God will have mercy, for I, being alone, am not prepared. But these days I've been eating out here." But cursed be the sleep that I slept. Because my bones and joints ached all night, I could not rest or find comfort. With hard labour, sickness, and hunger, I believed there was not an inch of flesh on my body, and since I had eaten little that day, my hunger raged, unsoothed by sleep. 1,000 times I cursed, God forgive me! My wretched fate, especially during the darkest hours, and, dare I say, for not daring to disturb him, for fear of waking him, I often prayed for death. Now we must do things differently. Lord, I said, let your mercy not burden me, as I know how to endure a night, and even more, if necessary, without eating. You will live longer and healthier, he replied. For as we were saying today, there is nothing in the world that promotes longevity like eating little. If that's the case, I thought to myself, I will never die, as I have always strictly followed this rule, and even hope for a slender life despite my misfortunes. And he lay down in bed, using his breeches and vest as a headboard, and ordered me to lie at his feet, which I did. When morning came, we rose and began to clean and shake his boots, jacket, shirt, and cloak, and I, who served him as a servant, helped him dress in whatever manner he chose. He washed himself, combed his hair, and buckled on his sword, saying to me at the same time, If you only knew, young man, what a treasure this is. No gold frame in the world could hold its worth. Indeed, none of the many fine pieces Antonio crafted could match the swiftness with which these steels are fitted. He took it out of the sheath and touched it with his fingers, saying, Do you see this? I will use it to clip a lock of wool. And I thought to myself, and I with my teeth, though not made of steel, a loaf of 4 pounds. He put it back into the sheath, tied it, and attached a string of thick beads from his belt, taking slow steps, keeping his body straight, making gentle movements with his head, tossing the cloak's cord over his shoulder and occasionally under his arm, and placing his right hand on his side. Blessed be you, Lord, I am saying, who gives sickness and provides the remedy. He left through the door, saying, Lazarus, look around the house while I go to Mass, make the bed, go to the river for water. It's down here. Lock the door with a key so nothing is stolen, and place it here at the sill, because if I come back before then, I can still enter. And he climbed up the street with such a gentle expression and bearing that anyone who didn't know him would think he was a close relative of the Count of Arcos, or at least a servant who dressed him. Who will find that lord of mine who does not think, according to his own satisfaction, having eaten well last night and slept in a good bed, and now it is morning, do not tell him that he has had a very good lunch. Great secrets are those you keep, Lord, which people remain ignorant of. No one would suspect it. Whom would not be deceived by that good disposition and reasonable coat and waistcoat, and who would think that that gentleman spent the whole day yesterday without eating, with that piece of bread that his servant Lazarus carried for 1 day and night in his chest-ark, where it could not be very clean, and today, washing his hands and face, lacking a handkerchief, he used the hem of his coat. I made a hard bed and took up the jar, and found myself by the river, where in an orchard I saw my master lying down with 2 women, who seemed to be unnecessary in that place. For many ladies follow the custom of going to the summer morning baths to refresh and dine, without bringing anything, trusting that someone will surely provide for them according to their usual way. O Lord, how many of these do you have scattered throughout the world, who suffer for what they call honour, which they would not endure for you? Thus was I at the door, looking and pondering these things and many others, when my master crossed the long and narrow street, and seeing him do so, I turned back to enter the house, and walked through it all, high and low, without delay or pause. And as I say, he was among them, looking like Matthias, speaking sweeter words than Ovid wrote. But when they sensed his genuine affection, they didn't hesitate to ask him to join them for lunch, with the customary payment. He, feeling so cold from the bag as he was warm in his stomach, took such a chill that it robbed him of his colour, and began to disturb his speech, and make invalid excuses. They who were well instrued, as they felt his illness, left him to himself. I, who was eating certain pieces of turnips with which I had breakfasted diligently, like a new servant, unseen by my master, returned home, from which I thought to sweep some part that was in great need, but found nothing. I began to think what to do, and it seemed to me to wait for my master until midday, if he came and by chance brought something to eat. But my experience was in vain. When I saw that it was 2 o'clock, and he did not come and hunger was afflicting me, I closed my door and put the key under the mat, and turned to my necessity. With a weak and feeble voice, and my hands resting on my breasts, I placed God before my eyes and spoke his name, beginning to ask for bread from door to door, in the largest houses that I could find. I returned to the inn, and on passing by the butcher's shop, I asked one of those women for a piece of beef nail with some cooked tripe. But since I had learned this trade from my blind master, becoming such a proficient disciple that even in a village without charity or abundant harvests, I was able to acquire so much bread that before the clock struck 4, I had stored several pounds in my body and more than 2 others in my sleeves and breasts. He asked me where I had come from. When I arrived home, my good master was already there, his cloak folded and sitting on the bench, and he was pacing around the courtyard. As I entered, he came towards me. I thought he wanted to scold me for my tardiness, but God did better. But you do as a good man would in this regard, that it is better to ask God's help than steal it, and so he helps me as seems right to me. And I only entrust you with the secret of my living with you, regarding my honour, although I well believe it will be kept secret, since I am little known in this town. I told him, Sir, I have been here until 2 o'clock, and since I saw that your majesty was not coming, I went through the city to seek refuge with good people, and they have given me this that you see. I showed him the bread and the intestines that I had brought in a corner of my cloak, upon which he gave a good look and said, I have been waiting for you to eat, and since I saw that you did not come, I ate. I would never have come to him. Be careful about that, sir. I replied, May he who cursed whoever asks for such an account, nor I give it. No, then, eat, sinner, he said. For if God wills, we will meet again soon without need, although I tell you that since I entered this house, things have not gone well for me. It must be the fate of some houses to be unlucky and situated in a bad place, for those who live there are always beset by misfortune. This is certainly true of this one, but I promise you, at the end of the month, not a trace will remain of it, even if they give it to me. I sat down at the end of the fence, and so, as not to be thought greedy, I kept quiet during my snack. As I began to eat my dinner, biting into my bread, I surreptitiously glanced at my unhappy master, who would not take his eyes off my skirts, which served him as a plate that evening. God have mercy on me, for I felt what I was feeling, and I had often gone through this many times before. I wondered if it would be appropriate to invite him to share my meal, but since he had told me he had already eaten, I feared he might decline the offer. In the end, I wished that this sinner could assist with my work and have breakfast as he had done the day before, for there was better equipment available, thanks to the better food and my reduced hunger. This bread is delicious, and this beef nail is so well cooked and seasoned that there's no one it would entice with its flavour. Beef nail, God wanted to fulfill my wish, and I still think he fulfilled his own, because as I began to eat and he was walking around, he came to me and said, Tell you, Lazarus, that you have the best grace in eating that I have ever seen in a man, and no one will see you doing it if you don't make them want it even if they don't have it. The very good one that you have, I thought to myself, makes my own seem beautiful. Nevertheless, I felt he was helping me because he helped himself and made a way for me, so I said, Lord, good equipment makes a good craftsman. Is it? Yes, Lord. Tell you that it's the best bite in the world, that there's no pheasant that can beat it. Well, then, try it, Lord, and see how it is. Put some butter on the nails and 3 or 4 portions of the whitest, most settled bread next to me, and start eating like someone who had won it, knowing each little bone better than a galgo would have done. With this delicious sauce, you eat it. I replied nonchalantly. By God, it tasted as if I hadn't eaten anything all day. May good years come like this. I thought to myself, he asked for the water jar and drank it just as I had brought it. It was a sign that, since he didn't lack water, my master must not have had enough food. We drank, and very happy, we went to sleep as we had the night before. To avoid any mess, this is how we lived for 8 or 10 days, with the sinner leaving each morning in a contented state, slowly walking through the streets, with poor Lazarus having a wolf's head. I often contemplated my misfortune. Fleeing from the ruinous masters I had known, and seeking improvement, I found myself facing someone who not only did not support me, but whom I had to support. Despite this, I felt affection for him, seeing that he was helpless, and that his enmity had once been pity. Many times, to please him, and make sure he was comfortable at the inn, I endured hardship. One morning he woke up in a sad state, wearing just a shirt, and went upstairs to tend to his business. Yet the stingy, blind man and the wretched, meagre clerk, despite God giving them both, one greets with a hand kissed, and the other with a loose tongue, kill me with hunger. Meanwhile, to avoid suspicion, I undressed him, taking off his waistcoat and stockings that lay on the bed, and found a silk pocket with intricate folds, completely devoid of any dirt or signs of wear. This man, I thought, is poor, and no one gives what they don't have. I only had one slight discontent about him. I wished that I did not have so much pride, but rather that he would lower his imagination with the extent of his need. It is right to disown the former and shame the latter. God is a witness that today, when I encounter someone of his habit, with that step and pomp, I feel pity, thinking if he suffers as he has seen others suffer, to whom, despite his poverty, I would gladly serve more than the others for what I have said. But, as it seems to me, it is already a rule among them used and upheld, even without bartering the beret must take its place. May the Lord remedy this, for with this evil they must perish. Since I was in such a state, leading the life I mention, my unlucky fate wanted, that being pursued it was not satisfied, and in that hard and shameful dwelling it would not last. And it happened, as if the year on this earth were barren of bread, the town council agreed that all stranger poor people should leave the city, with a proclamation that anyone who after that met them would be punished with lashes. And so, in enforcing the law, after 4 days since the announcement was made, I saw a procession of poor people being beaten through the 4 streets, which filled me with such great fear that I never dared to intervene and demand justice. Here, anyone who witnessed it would have seen the abstinence of my home, and the sorrow and silence of its inhabitants, to the point that we went for 2 or 3 days without a single bite to eat, nor did we utter a word. My life was saved by young women who wove cotton and made caps. Living in close proximity to us, I had dealings with them, and they gave me some scraps from the lither they brought, which I would carefully eat. And I pitied myself less than my master, who for 8 days refused to touch a single bite of food. At least, we stayed well, fed at home. I don't know how he was wandering, or what he was eating. And then one day at noon he came down the street with an elongated body, longer than a purebred dog. As you can see, it is gloomy, sad, and obscure. As long as we are here, we will suffer. And regarding his black servant, whom they call honourable, he took a straw from those which were hardly in the house, and went out to the door, gnashing his teeth, which had nothing to do with each other, still complaining of that evil son, saying, "It is bad to see that misfortune makes this dwelling dark. Go to the square and buy bread and wine and meat. Let's break the devil's eye." I already wish for this month to end so we can leave. So, being in this distressed and hungry pursuit one day, I don't know which good fortune or luck, a reel entered into my master's poor power, with which he came home as proud as if he had the treasure of Venice, and with a very joyful and cheerful gesture he gave it to me. Say, take it, Lazarus. God is already opening his hand. By our Lord, for how long I have been living in her, not a drop of wine nor a bite of meat have I tasted, nor have I had any rest. Yet such a sight she presents, such darkness and sorrow. And moreover, I tell you, for you to take notice, I have rented another house, and we will not stay in this disastrous one for more than a month. Damn her, and the one who put the first tile on her, for it is through her that I have entered in trouble. Go and come quickly, and let us eat today as princes. Taking my royal jar, I place it at their feet, and, setting my steps towards the square with joy and contentment, I begin to climb the street. But what avail is it if my sad fortune is that no pleasure comes without turmoil? To the sad and unfortunate house, to the gloomy and dark house, to the house where there is never food or drink. When I heard this, heaven and earth seemed to meet, and I said, "O wretched one!" I pushed myself against the wall to make way for them, and as his body passed through, a woman who must have been the deceased's wife, laden with mourning, followed, along with many other women. She cried out loudly, saying, "My husband and lord, where are they taking me?" And so it was, for while ascending the street, considering how best to use what lay ahead, offering infinite thanks to God for the wealth my master had acquired, suddenly a dead person came to meet me, carried down the street by numerous clergymen and people on a bier. They are taking this dead man to my house. I left the path I was on, cutting through the crowd, and ran as fast as I could down the street towards my home. "Why are you closing the door with such fury?" I said, "Come here, they've brought us a dead man." "How so?" he responded. "I found him up here, and his wife was saying, 'Husband and my lord, where are you taking me?' Once inside, I locked the door tightly, calling for my master's help and aid, embracing him, begging him to come and assist and defend the entrance. He, somewhat alarmed, thinking it might be something else, asked, 'What is it, boy? What voices are you giving? What are you doing?' 'To the dark and gloomy house, to the sad and wretched house, to the house where they never eat or drink. Here, sir, they've brought us this man.' And certainly, when my master heard this, though he had no reason to be overly joyful, he laughed so much that he couldn't speak for a long time. By then I had already hung the latch on the door, and put my shoulder against it as a defence. But since God has made things better, and they are moving on, open up and go get some food." "Let them finish crossing the street," I replied. The people passed by with their dead man, and I was still suspicious that they would force him into our home, but afterwards he laughed more than he ate, and my good master said to me, "It's true, Lazarus, according to what the widow said. You were right to think what you did. At last my beloved came to the street door, and I opened it with an effort, as was necessary due to my fear and agitation. Then I turned to continue on my way. Although we ate well that day, I had a bad taste in my mouth, nor did I regain my colour for 3 days. My master, however, was always cheerful whenever he remembered my consideration. Thus I stayed with my third and poor master, this squire, for some days, and in all of them I desired to know the intention behind his arrival and stay in this land, because from the very first day that I settled with him, I knew he was a stranger, due to my limited knowledge and interaction with the locals. Finally, my wish was fulfilled, and I learned what I desired, for one day after we had eaten reasonably and I was somewhat content, he told me about his estate and said he was from Old Castile, and that he had left his land simply because he did not want to remove his hat to a neighbouring knight. "Sire," I said, "if he is what you say, and has more than you, wouldn't it have been wiser to take it off from him first, since you claim that he took it off you as well?" "That's true, and he does have more, and he also took it off me. But out of how many times I took it off him first, it would not have been bad for him to keep some and gain an advantage over me. It seems to me, sir, I replied, that you should not consider that, especially when my elders have more. If I encounter Topo in the street, and he doesn't take my hat off completely, I'll know how to enter a house the next time he comes, pretending to have some business there, or crossing another street, if there is one, before he reaches me, so as not to take it off. A knight owes nothing to another but God and the king, and it is not right for a good man, even if he is careful, to neglect having a high opinion of himself. You are young, he answered me, and you do not understand the concept of honour, which is what defines good men today. So let me tell you that I am, as you can see, a squire, but by God, I remember one day I dishonoured an officer in my land, and I wanted to lay hands on him, because every time I met him he would say, "May God keep your mercy." "You, Sir Base Knave," I said to him, "why are you not well-mannered? Why do you say that God should protect you as if you were anyone?" From then on, from here and there, I took off my hat and spoke as I should. "Isn't it a good way to greet another man," I said, "to tell him may God keep him?" "Be careful with your flattery," he replied. And I came to this city, thinking I would find a good seat, but it has not turned out as I thought. Canonics and church lords, I find many of them, but they are people so limited that no one will get past them. When they want to reform their conscience and be satisfied with their sweat, they are sent to the chamber, in a sweaty jerkin or a worn-out coat or jacket. When a man settles down with a gentleman of title, he still endures his filth. Gentlemen of average height, they also beg me, but serving these people is a great task, because you have to turn from man into slave, and if not, go with God, they tell you. And most often the payments are in long installments, and most certainly eaten up by service. Then how is it that there is no skill in my serving and answering these people? That's what they say to men of little skill, but not to the highest ones like me. They should speak to me, at least kiss your hands. My lord, or better yet, please kiss mine, sir, if the one speaking is a gentleman. And so, of those from my land who attest to my maintenance, I never again wanted to endure, nor would I endure, nor will I endure any man in the world, from the king down, who says to me, "May God maintain you." "Sinner that I am," I said. That's why he shows so little care for maintaining himself, since he does not suffer anyone to beg him. "Mostly," he said, "I am not so poor that I do not have in my land a plot of houses, which, if they were standing and well cultivated, would be worth more than 200 times 1,000 maravedis, as they could be made large and good, and I have a dovercote that, if it were not knocked down as it is, would produce each year more than 200 pigeons, and other things that I keep silent, which I left for what concerned my honour. For God, if I were to meet him, I believe his private life would be very great, and that I would do him 1,000 services, as I know how to lie so well as anyone else, and please him in every possible way. And the gentlemen do not like virtuous men in their houses. They repel them, and consider them fools who are not fit for business, or for the Lord to relax his guard with. If he argues with one of his servants, give sharp remarks to ignite his anger, and make it seem in favour of the guilty party, say good things about what is good for him, and on the contrary, be malicious, scornful, and slander both those at home and those outside, investigate and try to learn other people's lives to tell them, and many other tricks of this kind that are used today in palaces. I already find his manners and habits amusing, even if they are not the best in the world. Never tell him anything that might offend him. Even if I were doing it for his own good, be very diligent in my person, both in words and deeds. Do not kill myself over not doing things well, when he is not going to see them, and get into arguments with the servants wherever I hear them, because it seems he takes great care of what concerns him. The man asked for the rent of the house, and the old woman for the bed. They calculated, and in 2 months they had earned what he would not have achieved in a year. I think it was 12 or 13 reals. And with these astute ones, as I say, I would act today, but my luck does not allow me to meet them. In this way, too, my master lamented his unfortunate fortune, telling me about his valiant person. Then a man and old woman entered through the door. He gave them a good answer, saying that he would go to the square to exchange a piece of 8 and return in the afternoon. But his departure was without return. So in the afternoon they returned, but it was too late. I told them that he had not yet come. As night fell, and he wasn't there, I was afraid to be alone in the house, so I went to my neighbours and told them the situation, and that's where I spent the night. When morning came, the creditors returned and asked about the neighbour, right at this door. The women answered, "Here is his servant and the key to the door." They asked me about him, and I told them that I didn't know where he was, nor had he returned home since he left to trade the peace. I thought that he had gone with the exchange, from me and from you. When they heard this, they went for a sheriff and a scribe. They came back later with them, took the key, called me, summoned witnesses, opened the door, and entered to seize my master's property until his debt is paid. They searched the whole house and found it empty, as I have said, and they asked me, "What is left of your master's property, his chests, wall hangings, and household items?" "I don't know." I answered. "Sir," I replied, "according to what my master told me, he owns a very good plot of land with several houses and a ruined dovercote." "That's fine," they said. "If that's all it is, we can use it to pay off the debt." I promised to tell them everything they asked for, weeping and fearing for my life. "That's fine," they said. "Just tell us everything you know, and don't be afraid." The scribe sat down on a bench to write up an inventory of my master's belongings, asking me what he owned. "Where in the city does he own this property?" they asked. "In his land," I replied. "By God, the deal is good," they said. "And where is your land?" "He told me it's from old Castile," I said. "Without a doubt," they say. "They must have taken him away and hidden him somewhere this night. Lord Constable, arrest this young man. He knows where he is." Just then the constable arrived and grabbed hold of my collar, saying, "Little fellow, you're under arrest unless you reveal the location of your master's property." I was terrified, having been gripped by the collar countless times before, but it was firmly fastened, preventing me from showing them the way. The sheriff and the scribe asked the man and the woman for their rights, which caused a great dispute and noise, as they argued that they were not obligated to pay, since there was nothing to seize and no warrant. The sheriff and the scribe laughed heartily, saying, "This is quite a story to collect your debt, though it would be better if it were true." The neighbours, who were present, said, "Gentlemen, this is an innocent child, and he has been with that squire for only a few days, and he knows nothing more about him than your merits, except how the little sinner comes to our house, and we feed him out of love for God, and at night he goes to sleep with him." Seeing my innocence, they let me go, considering me free. The others said they had given up on another business that was more important to them because of this one. Finally, after much shouting, he ultimately loaded a rather full old net with the old Ulmar fishing boat, although it wasn't overly heavy. All 5 of them jumped on board, shouting. I don't know what happened. I believe that the guilty Ulmar man will pay for all of them, and he was working hard during the time he should have rested and recovered from his previous labours. He was renting himself out. As I've mentioned, my poor master left me, which is when I discovered my unfortunate fate. He pointed out everything that could be held against me, and conducted my affairs so poorly that the masters, who usually leave their assistants alone, would not have done so with me if it hadn't been for my master's permission and his escape from me. He gave me the first shoes I ever broke in my life, but they didn't last me 8 days, nor could I keep up with his pace for longer. And for this and other little things I don't mention, I left him. Fourth treaty, how Lazarus settled with a friar of mercy. And what happened to him I had to search for the room, and it was a friar of mercy, whom the little women I mentioned led me to. They called him relative. Found great enemy of the choir and eating in the convent, lost by wandering outside, very friendly with secular business and visits, to such an extent that I think he broke more shoes than the entire convent. Fifth treaty, how Lazarus settled with a jester, and the events that occurred with him in the fifth. By my good fortune, it was a jester, the most carefree, unembarrassed, and great at throwing them the one I have ever seen, or hope to see, or believe anyone has, because he had and sought ways and means, very subtle inventions. Upon entering the places, they had to present the bull first. Thus, he tried to keep them favourable, so that they would support his business, and call their parishioners to receive the bull. After being thanked, he would inquire about their understanding. He would offer some small things to the clerics or priests, nothing of great value or substance, a mercialetus, if it was the season, a pair of limes or oranges, a peach, a couple of melons, each one kind of green pear. If they said they understood, he wouldn't speak a word in Latin to avoid stumbling. Instead, he would use a gentle and crafted romance and an extremely fluent tongue. When they did not take his bull a legal document granting permission or authority, he sought ways to have them taken, even by causing trouble for the village or using cunning tricks. And if he knew that these clerics were among the reverend ones, who were more concerned with money than letters and reverence, he would become among them a St. Thomas, and speak for 2 hours in Latin at least. It would seem so, even though it wasn't true. Given that it would be lengthy to describe everyone who witnessed his actions, I will mention a very subtle and ingenious one with which to demonstrate his resourcefulness. In a place in the Sagra of Toledo, he had preached for 2 or 3 days, carrying out his usual duties, and they had not taken a bull from him, nor did it seem they intended to. He called the constable a thief, and the other labelled him a forger. Upon this, the commissioner lord took a lance that was leaning against the door where they were playing. The constable reached for his sword, which he had on his belt. He was determined to get one, and thinking about what to do, he remembered inviting the village for another day to conclude the matter of the bull. That night, after dinner, they began playing cards, and during the game an argument erupted, leading to exchanges of bad words. All the noise and voices, everyone was screaming, guests and neighbours alike, rushed in and got in the middle of it, all very angry, trying to clear themselves of those in the middle who were causing trouble. But since people were charging at each other with great noise, and the house was filled with them, realizing they couldn't face off with weapons, they began exchanging insulting words. Among these, the sheriff told my master that he was a forger, and that the doctrines he preached were false. And thus we all fell asleep. When morning came, my master went to church, and ordered them to ring for mass, and the sermon to conclude the matter of the bulla. The commissioner lord climbed up to the pulpit, and began his sermon, encouraging the people not to be left without all the goods and indulgences that the holy bull brought. In the end, the villagers, seeing that they weren't enough to restore peace, decided to take the sheriff away from the inn to another location. And so my master became very angry. After guests and neighbours had begged him to lose his anger and go to sleep, he left. And the people gathered, who had been murmuring about the bulls, claiming they were false, and that the very sheriff had discovered it. So, after having bad intentions to take them, they turned away from everything with that incident. In the midst of the best part of the sermon, the sheriff entered the church door, and after making a prayer, he stood up, and with a clear and thoughtful voice began to say, "Good men, listen to me for a moment, then you will hear whoever you want." And he ended his reasoning. Some honourable men who were there wanted to stand up and eject the constable from the church to prevent scandal. But my master intervened and ordered everyone, under threat of excommunication, not to obstruct him, but to let him say whatever he wished. And so he also remained silent while the constable said all that I have related. When he fell silent, my master asked if he wanted to say more, and if so, to do so. I came here with this swindler who is preaching to you, who deceived and said that I should favour him in this matter, and that we would share the profit. Now, seeing the harm it would do to my conscience and your estates, repentant of what I have done, I declare to you clearly that the bulls I preach are false, and you should not believe them or take them, and that I, directly or indirectly, am not a party to them, and from now on I abandon the staff and lay it down, and if for some time this is punished for its falsity, let you be witnesses that I have no connection with it, nor do I assist it, but instead I disavow it, and declare its evil. As for me, I forgive it, because, Lord, you forgive me. The sheriff said, There is much more to say about you and your deceit, but for now it will suffice. The commissioner knelt on the pulpit, put his hands together, and looking up at the sky, he spoke thus, Lord God, to whom nothing is hidden, but all things manifest, and to whom nothing is impossible, but all things possible, you know the truth, and how unjustly I am treated. The noise and voices of the people were so great that they could not hear each other. Some were terrified and afraid. Do not look at him who does not know what he is doing or saying. But as for the insult to you, I beg of you, and implore you by justice, do not conceal it, because there is someone here who perhaps thought to take this holy bull, giving credit to the false words of that man, will stop doing so. And so it causes great harm to others. I beg you, Lord, do not hide it, but then show a miracle here, and may it be in this way, if what he says is true. And I bring evil and falsehood. Let this pulpit sink with me, and bury 7 states under the earth, where neither he nor I will ever appear. And if what I say is true, and he persuaded by the demon to take away and deprive those present of such great good speaks evil, then he too should be punished, and his malice known to all. Just as the devout Lord finished his prayer, the black sheriff fell from his state, and gave such a great blow to the ground that the entire church rang, and he began to roar, foam from his mouth, twist and make gestures with his hands, standing and moving around on the floor. Others pulled him by the legs, and they struggled fiercely, for there was no false mule in the world that could give such hard kicks. Some said, May the Lord help him, and be sufficient. Others, well, he was employed well, for he gave such false testimony. Finally, some who were there, and in my opinion not without much fear, approached him and held him by the arms, with which he delivered strong blows to those nearby. And so they held him for a considerable time, as more than 15 men were on top of him, and he was hitting them all with full hands, and if they didn't watch out, they would get it in the face. Let's all go and beg him. And so he descended from the pulpit, and entrusted that they fervently pray that our Lord would have mercy on that sinner, and restore him to health and sound mind, and cast out the demon, if his majesty had allowed it to enter him because of his great sin. The commissioner, as if waking up from a sweet dream, looked at them and at the offender and all those around, and very calmly said, Good men, you must never beg for a man in whom God has been so manifestly revealed. But since he commands us not to return evil for evil, and to forgive insults, with confidence we can ask him to fulfill what he commands us, and his majesty to pardon this one who offended him by putting an obstacle to his holy faith. Everyone knelt down, and before the altar, with the clergy, they began to sing in a low voice a litany. Meanwhile, my lord was on his knees at the pulpit, his hands and eyes fixed on heaven, transported in the divine essence, so that the sobs, noise, and voices in the church were no match for his divine contemplation. Those good men came to him, shouting to wake him up, and begged him to help that poor man who was dying, and not to dwell on past events or his bad words, for he had already received his punishment. But if there was anything he could do to save him from the danger and passion he was suffering. For God's sake, let him do it, for they could clearly see the guilt of the guilty and the truth and goodness of the innocent, as the Lord did not prolong the punishment in response to their request and vengeance. And having done this, he ordered them to bring the bull and put it on his head. Then the sinner, under the sheriff's guard, began little by little to get better and come back to himself. And coming he with the cross and blessed water, after having sung over him, My Lord, putting his hands on high, and looking into his eyes, which seemed like nothing but a little white, he begins a prayer no less long than devoted, with which he made all the people weep, as they usually do in passion sermons, from predicator and devout audience, supplicating our Lord, since he did not wish death of the sinner, but his life and repentance, that he might be willing to forgive and give him life and health, so that he would repent and confess his sins. And when he had returned according to his agreement, he fell at the feet of the Lord Commissioner and asked for his forgiveness, confessing that he had spoken those words under the influence of Satan, desiring to harm him and take revenge for his anger. But the more important reason was that Satan suffered great pain whenever good was done there in taking the bull. My Lord forgave him, and friendship was established between them, and such haste was made in taking the bull that almost no soul remained without it, husbands and wives, sons and daughters, servants and maids. The news of what had happened spread through the neighboring areas, and when we arrived there, no sermon or church visit was necessary, for they would come to the inn as if they were free peers. So in 10 or 12 places in those neighborhoods where we went, my Lord issued another 1,000 bulls without preaching a sermon. In another place, which I do not want to name for his honor, this happened. My master preached 2 or 3 sermons, and then would give God the credit. When he wrote the essay, I confessed my sin that I was also part of it, startled and believed that it was like that, as many others, but later, seeing the laughter and mockery that my master and the sheriff brought to the affair, I realized how cunningly my industrious and inventive master had manipulated things, understanding from my master's situation what was happening, and that although he said they trusted him for a year, it wasn't being put to use, and that they were so rebellious in taking it, and that his work was lost, he rang the bells to bid farewell. Let them not renounce our holy faith and go to the pains of hell, even though you aid them with alms and 5 paternosters and 5 avma-as, so that they may be freed from captivity. And having delivered his sermon and taken his leave from the pulpit, as he wished to descend, he called the scribe and me, who was laden with sacks, and bade us come to the first step. Then he took from the sheriff what he held in his hands, and what was in his sacks, placing them at his feet, and returned to the pulpit with a cheerful countenance, casting down from there 10 by 10 and 20 by 20 of his bulas in all directions, saying, My brethren, take of the grace that God sends you to your homes, and let it not grieve you, for it is a so pious work to redeem Christian captives held in Muslim land. And also avail yourselves for your parents, brothers, and kinsfolk who are in purgatory, as you will see in this holy bull. As the people saw them thus cast away, as something that was happening freely and coming from God's hand, they took more, even for their infants in the cradle, and for all their dead, counting from their children to the youngest servant they had, counting them on their fingers. After everyone had finished drinking, my Lord said from the pulpit to his secretary and the town clerk to get up, so that it would be known who were those who were to enjoy the holy indulgence and pardons of the holy bull, and so that he could give a good account to whom he had sent. We found ourselves in such haste that they still broke a poor old coat I was wearing, so much so that I certify your majesty that in little over an hour there was not a single bullet left in my saddlebags, and it became necessary to go to the inn for more. They were therefore all, with great goodwill, listing what they had taken, counting in order their children, servants, and dead. And so we parted, every one very happy with the good business. From his inventory he asked the mayors, out of charity, as he had work elsewhere, to instruct the scribe to give him authority over the inventory, an account of what remained there, which, according to the scribe, amounted to more than 2,000. Having done this, he bid them farewell with much peace and love, and thus we parted from this place, and even before we left, he was asked by the local vicar and alderman if the bull applied to the unborn children, to which he replied that, based on the texts he had studied, no, and they should consult older doctors than himself on this matter. My master said to the sheriff and scribe, "What do you think, like these peasants, who, merely saying old Christians without acts of charity, believe they can be saved without contributing anything from their own property?" Well, for the life of licentiate Pascasio Gio Mez, who at his own expense freed more than 10 captives. And so we went to another place, from that cape of Toledo towards La Mancha, where we met others more determined to obtain bullus. My master and the others who were with us carried out our duties in 2 festivals during which no more than 30 bolas had been issued. They had brought this for warmth, because it was extremely cold, without any one noticing or saying anything about it. Observing the great loss and significant expense this involved, as well as the cunning strategy my master employed to have his bulla spent. He celebrated Mass that day, and after finishing the sermon and returning to the altar, he took a cross that was barely over a palm in length and placed it on the flame in a brass container that was on the altar. Why? Since the Mass had ended and the blessing been given, he took it with a handkerchief, the cross well wrapped in his right hand and the bull in his left, and thus descended to the last row of the altar, where he made a sign for them to kiss the cross. And so the mayors and the oldest people from the town came, one by one, as is customary. The first to arrive, an old mayor, though he kissed the cross gently, brushed against his face and quickly left. Seeing this, my master said, "Go ahead, mayor." She climbed to the foot of the altar, and from there she said wonderful things, saying that because of their lack of charity, God had allowed this miracle, and that the cross should be taken to the main church of his bishopric, that because of the lack of charity in the town, the cross was burning, a miracle, and so did 7 or 8 others, and to them all he said, "Go ahead, gentlemen," a miracle. When he saw that those who had been touched were enough witnesses to the miracle, he refused to let anyone else kiss it. There was so much haste in taking the bull that 2 scribes, nor clergymen nor sacristans, were enough to write it. I am certain that they took more than 3,000 bulls, as I have told your majesty. He did not want to do this under any circumstances, but eventually, after being begged by so many, he left it. They gave him another old cross, made of silver, that weighed 2 or 3 pounds, according to them. After leaving, he went with great reverence, as is fitting, to take the holy cross, saying that he would have it set in gold, as was right. He was much begged by the town council and clergymen to leave the holy cross there in memory of the miracle, and thus we left happily with the good trade, and having negotiated well. No one saw what I did but me, as I climbed up from the altar to see, if there was anything left in the blisters, to claim it as my due, as I had done before. And when he saw me, he put his finger to his mouth, signaling me to be silent, and so I kept it until now. I obeyed because it suited me, though after seeing the miracle, I could not contain myself. My astute master's fear did not allow me to communicate with anyone, and it was never revealed from me, as he had taken an oath that I would not reveal the miracle. 6 treaty how Lazarus settled with a chaplain, and what happened to him after that, I settled with a master painter of drums for mauling the colours, and also suffered 1,000 evils. Although young, he pleased me greatly, and I thought to myself, how many of these jokes must these jesters play among innocent people? Finally, I stayed with this, my 5th master, for nearly 4 months, during which I also endured great hardships. Although he fed me well at the cost of the priests and other clergymen who went to preach. Being already a young man at this time, one day entering the main church, a chaplain from there received me as his own, and put me in charge of a donkey, 4 jars, and a whip, and I began to pour water through the city. This was the first step I took to achieve a good life, because my mouth was measured. I gave my master 30 maravedì ancient Spanish coins each day, and on Saturdays I earned money for myself, and all the rest, between weeks, amounted to 30 maravedis. My skill in the trade was such that after 4 years of practicing it, with a good deal of profit, I saved up to dress very honourably in old clothes, from which I bought an old fustaner type of heavy cloth jacket, a worn-out shirt with crossed sleeves and a buttoned front, and a coat that had been frieze-lined, along with an old sword from Cuellar. Once I saw myself dressed as a man of virtue, I told my master to take his donkey, as I no longer wished to continue that profession. With this I rejected the deal. 7th treaty, how Lazarus settled with an officer, and what happened to him after leaving the chaplain. I agreed to be a man of justice with an officer, but lived very little with him, considering it a dangerous profession, especially one night when myself and my master were chased by some retreaters with stones and sticks, and my master, who waited, was treated badly, but they did not reach me. And thinking about what kind of life I could live to find rest and earn something for old age, God illuminated me and put me on a profitable path. And with the favour I received from friends and lords, all my past work and fatigue were paid off by achieving what I sought, which was a royal profession, realizing that there is no one who can master it, except those who have it, in which I now live and reside to serve God and your mercy. It has happened to me so well, I have used it so easily, that almost all things related to the profession pass through my hands to such an extent that in the whole city, if Lazarillo de Tormes does not understand something about selling wine or anything, they consider it unprofitable. And indeed, I am responsible for preaching the wines that are sold in this city, and in auctions and lost items, accompanying those who suffer persecutions for justice, and loudly declaring their crimes a town crier. Speaking in good romance in this profession, one day we hanged a thief in Toledo, and he was carrying a good rope of esparto. I knew and realized the sentence that my blind master had said in Escalona, and I repent of the poor payment I gave him for all he taught me, for after God, he gave me industry to reach the state I am now in. During this time, seeing my ability and good fortune, with news of my person reaching the archpriest of St. Salvador, my lord, and your servant and friend, because I was promoting his wines, he sought to marry me to one of his servants. And upon considering that such a person could only bring good and favour, I agreed to it. And so I married her, and up until now I am not repentant, for besides being a good daughter, diligent, servile, I have received all favour and help from the archpriest. And every year, at times, he gives us a load of wheat at Easter, his meat, when the pair of wine casks are empty, old shoes that he no longer uses, and he had us rent a small house next to his own. On Sundays and holidays we almost all ate there. But malicious tongues, which never ceased nor will cease, do not allow us to live, saying this, and that, knowing full well that my wife goes to make his bed and prepare his meal. And may God help them if they tell the truth, although I have always had some suspicion, and there have been some bad dinners waiting for them for hours, until late into the night, and even more. And it comes to my memory what my blind master told me in Escalona, while holding on to his horn, though truly, I always think the devil brings this to my mind to make me act badly, and it serves him no purpose. Besides, if she isn't a woman who knows how to handle these insults, my lord has promised me what I believe he will fulfill. He spoke to me for a very long time in her presence and said, Lazarillo de Tormes, whoever pays attention to the words of slanderous tongues will never prosper. I say this because I wouldn't be surprised if I saw your wife enter and leave my house. She enters in a way that is honourable to you both, and I promise you this. Therefore, don't pay attention to what they might say, but focus on what concerns you. That is, what is beneficial for you. Lord, I replied, I have decided to stick with the good ones. But I from one side and my Lord from another. We said and assured her enough until her tears stopped, with an oath that I made to never again in my life bring up anything like that to her mind, and that I was content and considered it good for her to come and go day and night, as I was well sure of her goodness, and so we all three remained perfectly satisfied. It is true that some of my friends have told me something disheartening, and even though they've assured me 3 times that before I married her she had given birth 3 times, speaking with reverence about them, because she is here in front of us. Then my wife took an oath upon herself, which made me think the house would collapse on us, and afterwards she began to cry and curse whoever had married her to me, in such a way that I wished I were dead before those words left my mouth. As of today, no one has ever heard us speak about this case. Whenever someone feels like saying something about it, I cut them off and say, Listen, if you're a friend, don't tell me things that weigh on you, because I don't have friends who burden me, especially if they want to slander my wife, who is the most precious thing in the world to me, and I love her more than myself. God has granted me 1,000 blessings with her, and she deserves much more than I do. I swear on the consecrated host that she is as good a woman as lives within the gates of Toledo. If anyone says anything else to me, I will kill myself alongside them. In this way they say nothing, and I have peace in my home. I will inform your grace about whatever happens to me from now on. This was the same year our victorious emperor entered this illustrious city of Toledo and held court there, with great festivities, as you have heard. At that time I was enjoying prosperity, and at the peak of all good fortune.